Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Kilani Daane, who is a former Division I college athlete who has now found herself and her calling in the coaching industry. Kilani, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan, for having me.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to this conversation. But before we get started, just introduce yourself to my listeners to let them know a little bit about who Kilani is.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my name is Kilani. I am a 22-year-old young entrepreneur. As you mentioned, I have a background in athletics. I was a Division I beach volleyball player, and entrepreneurship has always been something that is close to me. I've been in and out of creating my own businesses pretty much since the age of 7. But I started my first, what I would call my real business, when I was 20 years old. And that business was what allowed me to transition into my role as a coach now. So I currently am an executive and career coach, and I operate under a coaching organization called Level 5 Partners, which is co-owned by my dad and I, my dad also being a coach.
It's cool. That is so cool. So before we get into the coaching stuff, let's talk a little bit of sports. So I don't know that people realize the real commitment to Division I college athletics. I mean, me coming from the youth sports, industry, I guess you can call it nowadays. I know a lot of parents and players who were really misguided on what might be involved in Division I college athletics, and it really does, um, you know, take over your life at that point. So, you said it was beach volleyball was your sport. Before we started recording, we were talking, and you started out in, I guess they call it regular volleyball, right? Just and then kind of converted to beach volleyball. So, tell me a little bit about, um, how old were you when you got started in the game of volleyball in general, and then what age was it when you made that conversion to beach volleyball? And just tell me a little bit about the differences of the two games.
Mhm. I was 12 years old the first time I played volleyball. I would always just practice with my dad in the backyard. And I was actually not at all interested in sports when I was 12. And my parents and I made an agreement that I would have to play some sport in school. And since volleyball was one that I had played casually on the side, I decided to go try out for the team at school. So I was in grade 6 at this point, and I actually got cut from the team because I had no volleyball experience. And I'm the kind of person, I'm very stubborn. If you tell me I can't do something, that's what lights the fire under me. I've always been that way. And so when I was told that I couldn't play volleyball, suddenly now I was inspired to play volleyball. And I signed myself up for my first volleyball camp that summer at Stanford University. And I went to play there, and that's when I fell in love with the sport. When I got addicted to the feeling of getting better and seeing my progress, and from there I was just hooked and spent all of my time pretty much playing volleyball. And then when I was 15, I transitioned into beach volleyball. And a big part of that switch was I was actually encouraged by my indoor volleyball coach at the time to switch to beach volleyball because I had dreams of going to play Division I, but I'm extremely short for a volleyball player. I'm 5'7". And so while it is certainly possible to make it in indoor volleyball, I was at quite a disadvantage. And I also lived in a country where it was going to be hard for me to get recruited because I grew up in Singapore. And so I switched to beach volleyball. I was reluctant about it at first, but once I started playing beach volleyball, I realized that I enjoyed that version of volleyball a lot more and kind of went through the same process of falling in love with that one. And so kind of the main differences between the two is beach volleyball is of course played on sand, whereas indoor is played on a court. There are 2 people in beach and 6 in indoor. And the court is also slightly smaller in beach just to accommodate for less people. And there are also a couple of different rules in terms of what you can and can't do specifically with your hands. But a lot of that is just kind of in the volleyball world.
Right. Right. So, um, that transition from going to a team of 6, to just a team of 2, what was that adjustment like for you?
It was actually pretty natural for me because I was always a very scrappy player indoor. So for me, I always would just be running after the ball. My instinct was to just go after the ball. So when I switched to beach volleyball, it was the same habit. It was a little tougher getting used to running on sand and then also realizing that I had more court to cover. But it wasn't too much of a transition for me because that was the part that I really loved in volleyball.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, just being a member of that, two-person team in beach volleyball, um, the chemistry that you're developing with your partner there, um, and you guys just kind of feeding off of each other. Um, how, I guess, how did you kind of, fan the flame of that chemistry? And because I, again, coming from a baseball background, I'm almost anticipating that's similar to like a pitcher catcher relationship, where you get to a point where you almost know what your teammate's going to do before she does it. Am I right there? I mean, how did you develop that chemistry with just having one other teammate that you're working with?
Yeah, the chemistry piece is definitely huge in beach volleyball. As you mentioned with the pitcher catcher relationship, there's so much that needs to go on there, especially because that relationship is pretty much what makes or breaks the game. I found a lot that in indoor, you didn't need to be particularly close with your team in order to perform well. But when there's just two of you, there needs to be lots of communication. And you also need to be close off the court. Like a big part of it for me was getting to know my beach partner for who they really were, what makes them upset, what makes them happy, what calms them down, and being able to be there for them both as their biggest cheerleader and being able to bring them up when they're down is a huge part of the game.
Yeah, and you actually just answered my what my next question would have been, was that off court relationship as well. So you really are building a bond, with your partner that extends well beyond the game, obviously. So at what point in your adolescent career did you make the determination as to, wow, I want to do this in college? And what was the focus, like Division I college immediately, or it was just I want to get to college and be able to continue to participate in this sport?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I actually, when I first started falling in love with volleyball, I spent all of my time not just playing, but also watching videos of past Olympics, of past championships, and I just spent all my time consuming volleyball content. And as with all adolescent people in athletics, we have our idols. We look at certain people and where they are, and my idol is a woman called Logan Tom, and she was an Olympian. And so it became my dream at the age of, I think it was 13, to go to the Olympics. That was kind of what I had my sights set on. And for me, the stepping stone to get there was to play Division I.
Yeah. And then again, obviously, being 5'7", that was probably an obstacle that you had to overcome with recruiters, immediately. But then you also mentioned about how you kind of have that grit and resilience of, when somebody says no, can't do it, it just gives you that incentive so much more. So did you use your 5'7", what many people would have said was, um, probably a downfall that you couldn't control, to really turn that into your superpower, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely. I started developing myself a lot beyond just my physicality. So I really worked on how high can I jump, how fast can I run, how much grit can I play with, how can I make myself stand out so that when you're watching the game, I'm that one player that you're focused in on. And I started to shift my game into making myself stand out in a crowd, as well as my mindset. So a lot of the recruiting conversations that I would have with coaches was very much based on my attitude, who I was, as a player and a person, rather than just my height, which is kind of the first thing that a lot of them do look at. And when I was recruited, the coach that recruited me actually said that he was recruiting me for my mindset, my attitude, and because he knew that he could do something with me in the 4 years that I was going to be there.
It's awesome. And I don't think we actually mentioned, but where did you go to school at? Where did you play at in college?
I went to Tulane University.
Okay. All right. Cool. So um, at at what point did you move to the States from Singapore? Was it not until you went to college, or did you make that transition earlier?
Nope, it was right when I went to university.
So what was
No.
that culture shock like going from Singapore to Tulane University?
Yeah, I was lucky that I went to an American school in Singapore. So most of the people that I was surrounded with were from an American background. Singapore is really big for military as well as oil. So we'd have a lot of American families come to Singapore temporarily, and the kids would all go to school at my school. So I was lucky that I had that. But when I did move to the US, of course, there was still, the entire country is very different from Singapore. So it was definitely an adjustment for me when I first got there, understanding the difference of how people spent their time, what you do, especially on a college campus for the first time. The biggest thing for me was football games, getting used to that. I became interested in football once I was there, but before that, I had never watched a football game before. And of course, being in the South too, the tailgates before and everything was, a huge part of the process. And so getting used to all of that stuff was an adjustment.
Yeah, yeah. I know in some of our exchanges before the interview, um, you know, you talked about that you are a bit of a world traveler as well, and you liked reading about me and my wife's story with what we've done and living in an RV and stuff, and I tell people all the time that the best education you get is to just get out there and meet new people, and in addition to that adjustment in college, and there are probably two educations going on in college, one that was taking place in the classroom and then the other that was taking place just by meeting and throwing yourself out there to other people. But how has your travel and being able to experience different cultures really kind of help you grow as a human at a very young age?
Yeah, I always say that my travel experience growing up was what has kind of formed me as an adult. Is I was always interested in understanding the differences in people, especially in different cultures, as I traveled around Asia a lot growing up. I was very lucky that my family and I would travel to maybe 3 or 4 different countries in a year, which was really great. And I'd say at around the age of 12 or so, when I started moving into adolescence, I started to pick up on the differences in cultures, in communication, and body language between different people. And that's what really sparked my interest in human connection, human communication. And I studied psychology in university. And so it's kind of been a track on my life for me to understand people, what makes them tick, who we are, and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I mean, that's something that I talk about all the time is just human connection. And I think if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's people really understanding how important that is, how important that connection is once it was stripped from us for almost 2 years. Um, and I think it's something that a lot of us had probably taken for granted, before the pandemic. And I tell people all the time, obviously one of the um, difficulties that of us traveling is being apart from our family, for extended periods of time. But by the same token, the silver lining that I've found on our end is that now the time that we spend with our family is much more intentional than what it ever was in the past. Because again, I think if you, and it's not even like, I mean, there's times where when we were still living back in our hometown, and we would still go, probably months without seeing our family, but you never thought of it because again, they're just down the road, sort of thing. So it comes back to that, I taken it for granted that, oh, okay, I haven't seen so and so for 3 weeks, but they're just down the road. And again, now Like we're getting ready. We're actually back home in Pennsylvania right now, and we've been here for an extended period of time. We're getting ready to hit the road in a couple of weeks, and you know, again, it's that intentionality and that just being present when you're, when you're with people. So in your, like I said, in your studies of people, um, what's one of the biggest things um, that you've noticed that we have in common as human beings?
I think it's our need to connect with other people in some way or another. And we all have different ways of connecting and ways of liking to connect. But as you mentioned, I think that the pandemic is something that really taught us that even those of us who like to spend time alone, I'm through and through an introvert, so I love my alone time. There's still so much importance of being able to spend at least some kind of connection with other people.
Yeah. And I think what people misunderstand about us introverts is that we're longing for a deeper connection with others.
Mm-hmm.
So like small talk, like I don't want to go to a networking event and just, hear small talk. Like I want to truly be able to have a conversation with you and connect with you on a, on a different level. And I think that's what people necessarily um, don't get about introverts for sure. So, um, so fast forward here a little bit to what you're doing today. Again, 22 years old, corporate coach. How did um, participating participating in athletics throughout your youth and into your early adulthood through college help um, make that transition into coaching?
Mm-hmm. I think the two big pieces were again that piece of mindset and connecting with people and building relationships with people, but then also having that tenacity to be able to go out there and go after what I want. A big part of coaching that a lot of people don't think about is the fact that you need to be a good coach, but on top of that, you also need to be a good business person. You need to be able to go out and sell your services, talk to people, build relationships, network. And I think being in athletics and especially, learning how to build such tight relationships with a team of people has allowed me to build relationships with people that I don't know and has given me the courage to go up to strangers and talk to people who have no idea who I am and to have that belief in myself that I have something to offer to these people. And then also to have the tenacity to keep chasing that, to keep going even when things are hard, because in any business there isn't a constant uptick, right? There's ups, there's downs, and being able to push yourself through those low moments even when you don't have motivation, I think is a huge part of the process.
Yeah, the other thing that I love about your story again is just your youth in general. Because the nonprofit organization that I had started, I was 20 years old when I started that organization, and I wish I could tell you that I had this grand vision as to what it would turn into when I was 20, but that wasn't the case at all. But yet, I do still remember sitting down in meetings and having conversations with people who would just flat out tell me that there was no way I could do, you know, what I was doing, really for no other reason other than my age. And it's something that throughout my career, I always like I never put a number on that. Like I didn't care how old somebody was, in my hiring process, bringing on whether it was a new coach for our organization or a new employee. The age did not matter to me if they were bringing something to the table. Like that had no relevance on that as well because I knew what it felt like for someone to kind of tell me I was unqualified for nothing other than this number. So tell me um, how you've overcome that. I'm sure there's been some instances where people, get on a call with you and you're, probably in a room with, people who could be your parents and they're probably thinking, well, wait a second, what's this kid gonna tell me that I don't already know? So is that something you've experienced and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, it definitely is something that I've experienced. I think I'm really lucky that we're at a point in our society where people are starting to look less at age, and that they do see being in your early 20s as still that you have a valuable perspective to offer. However, occasionally I do get those comments like, you're so young, how do you know more than I do? And for me, the big key when I'm speaking to people who say that is that one, my job isn't to be good at their job. My job is to be good at understanding them as people, as the way that they show up in the world. And for me, I've been practicing that in my own life and my own experience since pretty much I was a conscious human being. And so I have my whole life of experience in that area, and that's what I come in to provide insight on. And another piece of it is that, especially in the corporate space, we see a huge gap between the older generations and the younger generations. And that's a big piece that my dad and I work with together, being, of course, from very different generations. And we found that a lot of younger corporate employees don't want to speak to coaches who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They want to speak to people who are closer to their age because they feel this sense of trust and connection with them. And so my dad and I being able to come into organizations to offer both his perspective, being, a Gen X, and then me being a Gen Z, allows us to kind of cover all the bases.
Yeah, that is that's very cool. How do you think? And we touched on this just a little bit earlier, but with you being able to travel as much as you have, um, that experience, that life experience, and that out of the classroom education, how has that helped you adapt to understanding these people's different perspectives when you come into a conversation like that?
I think it's allowed me to have a greater appreciation for where they're coming from. And part of that being to not take what they're saying personally, to understand that what they're seeing, who they're seeing me as, comes from their experience as a human. And so, even though I don't completely understand their entire being, I can understand that based on what they've experienced, that they're seeing me as a different person than maybe someone else with different experience would. And so being able to look at that from a more objective standpoint rather than taking it as a personal attack on me, and rather just seeing it more as a worldview, allows me to kind of take a step back from that and then also respond in a more objective way.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm a big proponent of. I've got a grandson right now who's a starting his senior year of high school, and I think I've finally convinced him that before going right into college after high school immediately, he should take a gap year off and travel. And I said, I'm pretty sure I've convinced him because he's actually purchased a vehicle that he's going to convert into a kind of um, quasi van life vehicle. Um, but what is your take on that as far as um, society tells us you get done with high school, you go to a 4 year college, you enter corporate America or whatever, and you just kind of get on this rat race of what they tell us to do. Um, I'm a much different thinker in that regard, where, like I said to you, I think there's a huge education that can be gained from just simply traveling and seeing, again, whether it's worldwide in other countries or whether it's right here in in the States. I think there's a huge education out there that can be had by doing that. So I'd like to hear your take on that as a young person.
Yeah, I'm also a huge proponent of kind of just going after what you want, whether that is going to university and then pursuing a corporate career, or if it's taking a gap year or a gap 10 years, or whatever comes up for you. I think is kind of the most important thing to follow. I think a lot of us are in this mindset, as you said, that university isn't an option. It's the next step after high school. And I was actually having this conversation with my dad a little while ago. And what we found interesting was that college used to be a place where you go to get a higher education. It was a place for scholars, and everyone who went there was extremely passionate about what they were studying because it was kind of an honorable thing to do. You only went if it was something you wanted to pursue. But now, how many people do you hear in university who say, like, I don't even know what I want to study. Why am I even here? I'm just here to, get an easier degree or, whatever it is. And I think that takes away a lot from what they could be doing, what could be making them happy. If they know that they want to do something else. And another interesting thing about that to me is if you talk to a little kid who's 3, 4, 5 years old, they're always saying, I want to be an astronaut, I want to, be a doctor, be a superhero, like whatever. They have these crazy dreams. And yet by the time they're 17 or 18, it's just, oh, I'm gonna go get a business degree and, figure it out from there. And so it's interesting how much that can change. It's almost like our dreams kind of get pushed into this narrow, option that we can decide on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's so many kids that are entering college with a, undeclared major. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a telltale sign right there of like, well, maybe you shouldn't enter college with an undeclared measure because what's going to change in those 4 years that you might know, where if you're undeclared, man, just hop in a car or something and go. And then I think you'll find what you want to do at that point with the people that you end up meeting and the life experiences that you're going to gain. And, obviously, I've kind of, with living in an RV and everything, when we're minimalists at this point. And, I think, another thing society just drives in you is that we should just consume and consume and consume. And, when we were downsizing and selling our house, and we went from a, 3,500 square foot house to a, just under 300 square foot RV. And, during that process, it was so revealing um, how much crap you accumulate that you're never going to use. We were selling stuff off that we hadn't used in 20 years of being in our house. Um, and I just think if we get to a point where we understand that experiences are so much more valuable than things ever will be, it'll kind of help us, move forward as well. So I'm going to kind of flip the table a little bit on you because I know one of the questions that we always get since we've been traveling now is people saying to us, where's the favorite place you've ever been? And I tell them I can't answer the question. So you, as having a lot of traveling under your belt, even at a young age, um, I'm going to flip that over to you and see if you can actually answer that question. So where's the favorite spot that you've been?
Yeah, that is a tough question to answer. I think if I can narrow it down to two places, the two that have really stood out to me were Hawaii. That was a place that we frequently visited as a family growing up. Every year or so we would go there as kind of like a second home. So I have a lot of good memories there. And then the second one was actually somewhere I went in May of this year for the first time, and that was to Iceland, which was a really, really cool country. And it was actually, we were only there for less than 24 hours because we took a layover there before going to Norway. But that less than 24 hours in Iceland, the place just felt so magical and I felt really, really connected to it.
That's cool. That's cool. But yeah, I know, like I said, when people ask that question to me, it's just like, you know what? There's so much beauty. Um, I just I can't narrow it down. And again, I can usually do like you did, where I can get you, in no particular order, here's three or four. But then after you think about it, it's like, oh, but this place is pretty cool too, So, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I think people just really need to take the time to experience life a little bit more before they, get into that corporate 9 to 5 and, on the hamster wheel that society wants us to jump on. And just, I love your concept of, understanding options, that college is an option. It's not the path. So I love that. You're definitely wise beyond your years, without a doubt. We're just about out of time here, but before I get to my final question, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to bring up?
Nope, I think we've covered pretty much everything.
That's cool. So how do people get a hold of you if they're looking to engage in your coaching services? Where can they find Kilani on the web? Where can they connect?
I think I'm most active on LinkedIn. It's just my first and last name on LinkedIn. My dad and I also have a website for our coaching organization, which is www.levelvpartners.com. And then also by email is kilani@levelvpartners.com.
Awesome. Love it. So that brings us to our final question. And as you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People, Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So what's one of the things that Kilani does to make the world a little bit better place?
My biggest thing is smiling at everyone I walk past, even if I have no idea who they are. I just think that you smiling at them and them smiling back just kind of creates this happy energy around.
Love it. I love it. And that is probably one of my most common answers. So I love that. And I think it's something we all need to do more of. Because I think you're right. I think it creates an incredible positive energy right out of the gate. Whether you're having a good day or a bad day, just smile at somebody, they'll smile back. And then that'll make them want to, if they're not that type of person who wants to smile at somebody, maybe now because you smiled at them, they're going to go down and, smile at you or smile at someone else, a couple feet down the sidewalk. So it's throwing that pebble into the pond, creating that ripple effect. And if we get the whole world smiling, I think we'll do a much better.
Absolutely.
So, Kilani, I really appreciate you taking the time. Enjoyed this conversation. For folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com or danclouser.com. Pick up a copy of my most recent book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1. Kilani, thanks again for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.